My name is Dorothy Ann Whitfield, born Dorothy Ann Crawford, and I was brought into this world on the 12th of April in the year 1845 in Maury County, Tennessee, on my father's farm, some 6 miles south of the town of Columbia. I am now in my 83rd year, and the physician who attended me last month did not attempt to hide from me his belief that I am not likely to see another spring. I do not challenge his judgment. My body has been worn down for quite some time, and I have long since stopped arguing with warnings I cannot deny. I have lived a respectable life, or so it would seem to anyone who has known me during these past 6 decades in this county. I have been a dutiful wife, a devoted mother, a faithful member of the Methodist Church, and a dependable neighbor. I have buried a husband, 2 children, and more friends than I am able to count. I have grandchildren who come to see me on Sundays and bring their own little ones, small faces I cannot always keep properly arranged in my aging mind. And I have carried a secret for 63 years that not one of my 5 surviving children knows. Not one. I have carried it to every church service, every family supper, every Christmas gathering, every bedside vigil I have attended. I have spoken it to no living soul since the autumn of 1865, when my mother looked directly into my face and told me that what had happened was finished, that it would not be mentioned again, that I would go on with my life as though it had never taken place. I obeyed her for 63 years. I obeyed her, but she has been dead since 1912. My father has been gone since 1894, and the cousin who helped in hiding what I am about to tell you died in 1921, and I am 83 years old and fading by degrees. It occurs to me that if this truth dies with me, it will be as though a person never existed, and that is something I cannot allow, whatever the cost to my reputation. Now that I am too old to care much for reputation, I must begin where everything began, which is with the war, and with what the war did to the place where I was raised, and the people I loved. I was 15 years old when the first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in the spring of 1861. My father was a farmer of moderate means in Maury County. We cultivated around 200 acres, grew cotton and corn, kept hogs and cattle, and owned no slaves, which set us apart from the larger planters of the county, but placed us in a strange position when the war came. My father had no deep quarrel with the Union, but neither was he willing to see Tennessee occupied by federal armies. His sympathies, like those of most men in our county, leaned toward the Confederacy without being what I would call passionate. My 2 older brothers, William and John, enlisted in the Confederate Army in the summer of 1861. William joined the 1st Tennessee Infantry. John joined a cavalry unit under Forrest's command. Some months later, I was 16 years old when I watched my brothers march away to a war none of us yet understood in its true size and meaning. My mother cried when they left. My father did not, but I saw him standing alone in the barn that evening for a long time, doing nothing in particular, and that told me more than tears could have. The early years of the war reached us through letters, newspapers, and rumor. We heard of the Battle of Shiloh in April of 1862, not far from us in western Tennessee, with the cold and distant horror of those who received the news, rather than those who lived through it. We followed reports as best we could. Letters from William came at uneven intervals from his regiment's various camps. John, being with the cavalry and therefore more mobile, wrote even less often. We lived in a state of suspended fear, always waiting for the letter that might not come, or the telegram that might. Federal troops entered Middle Tennessee in 1862, after the fall of Fort Donelson and Nashville. By the autumn of that year, Columbia and the surrounding county were under different degrees of Union occupation and authority. History books may describe such things in calm and clinical terms: occupation, control, federal, authority. But the reality of it was far more personal and far more unsettling than those words suggest. Federal soldiers moved through our county, searching for supplies, taking what they required, occupying homes when it suited their needs. My father's farm lost 2 horses in the autumn of 1860, 2 to a federal foraging party that left behind a receipt and a promise that the Union Army would repay him after the war ended. It did not. The war was not yet over, and my father's feelings toward federal authority were not improved by that exchange. By 1863 and 1864, the occupation had settled into something like routine, which may be the strangest statement I can make about it. Federal officers were quartered in the larger homes of the county. Patrols moved along the roads. Trade continued in altered ways. Life adjusted itself to circumstances, as life always does, in ways that seem remarkable when remembered later, but felt only necessary at the time. It was in the summer of 1864 that I first met Thomas Reeves. He was a corporal in an Ohio regiment stationed near Columbia. I will not trouble myself to name the exact regiment, as it matters little now, and would only add unnecessary detail for anyone inclined to verify what I am telling you. He was 22 years old to my 19. He was not a large man, but he was well-formed, with light brown hair and blue eyes of a particular quality that I noticed at once. They were attentive eyes that suggested the man behind them truly understood what he saw, rather than merely glancing over it. He came to our farm in his official capacity, asking about provisions. My father spoke with him in the yard with the careful politeness that occupied Tennessee civilians had learned to use with federal soldiers, neither friendly nor openly hostile, measured so as to avoid trouble while yielding as little as possible. I brought water from the well, as was expected of a daughter in such a situation, and Thomas Reeves thanked me with a directness that surprised me. Federal soldiers had grown used to being treated as an unwelcome presence, and many of them carried a matching sharpness. He did not. He returned the next week, on some reason I no longer remember. Then again, the week after that, my father watched these visits with growing concern, and my mother with something close to alarm. Thomas Reeves was a federal soldier, an Ohio man. Though Tennessee feeling about the war was more divided than the state's Confederate loyalty suggested, bringing a Union soldier into friendly contact with one's daughter was not something done without consequence. But my mother understood something my father perhaps would not admit. I was 19 years old in the summer of 1864. The young men of my own community had been gone to war for 3 years, and Thomas Reeves was standing in our yard each week, looking at me with those attentive blue eyes. She spoke to me in private, not to forbid it, but to warn me of the dangers, the social danger, the practical danger, the physical danger of any attachment that could not end in marriage under such conditions. I listened with the respect I had been raised to show, and with the quiet certainty of a 19-year-old girl that such warnings, though sensible in theory, did not apply to what she felt. Thomas Reeves and I spent the rest of that summer in each other's company, whenever opportunity allowed, which was not often given my parents' watchfulness and his military duties, but often enough to form a kind of courtship, conducted in the careful and formal way the times required. We spoke of our families, our childhoods, our hopes for the world after the war. He was from a farm outside Dayton, Ohio, the second of 4 sons. With a modest schooling and a keen mind, he expected to return to Ohio after the war and establish himself on land of his own. He did not speak of marriage to me, and I understood the reason. He was a federal soldier in an occupied Confederate state. I was the daughter of a farmer who leaned toward the Confederacy. The war was not yet over, though by the summer of 1864, most clear-sighted men could see which way it would likely end. Marriage between us was not impossible in law. Such unions did occur during the years of occupation, though they were uncommon. But it was highly unlikely under our circumstances, and I believe we both understood this without giving it voice. What followed between us that summer I will not describe in detail, partly because it is not the sort of thing one describes plainly, and partly because the details matter far less than the result. I was a willing participant in what took place. I do not say this as an excuse, but as a simple truth. I was not forced. I was 19 years old, and possessed enough understanding to know what I was doing and what it could mean. The responsibility was mine as surely as it was his regiment left the county in October of 1864. He came to say goodbye on a Thursday afternoon. Quietly and without ceremony, he told me he would write. He did write one letter, postmarked from Georgia, and dated December of that year, asking after my well-being, in careful words, that admitted nothing of what had passed between us. I received that letter in February of 1865, by which time I had known for 3 months that I was carrying his child. I did not answer his letter. By the time it reached me, any possible future between us had been overtaken by a circumstance that allowed no solution in which he could share. My parents knew. My mother had known even before I told her, as mothers often do. She did not scold me at length. Rather, she delivered one quiet and devastating rebuke that lasted only a few moments, but settled over the rest of my life like a shadow dot, perhaps 10 minutes, and it was never spoken of again. Then she set herself to handling the situation with the same steady and practical skill she applied to every problem the household faced. My father refused to speak to me for 2 weeks. When he finally began speaking again, he did not refer to what had happened, and never mentioned it again for the rest of his life. The plan my mother arranged was simple and, in rural Tennessee at that time, not completely unusual. I was sent in November of 1864 to stay with my widowed cousin Eleanor Pugh, who lived in Giles County about 20 miles to the south. Eleanor was 38 years old, a widow with no children of her own, a respectable woman with good standing in her community. The understanding was that I would go to her under the appearance of helping her during the hard winter months, a believable reason, since the war had disturbed work and labor across the region, and that the child, once born, would be recorded as an orphan ward, whom Eleanor had taken in. Such arrangements were not uncommon in those years. The war had created many real orphans, and the custom of taking in children whose parents had died or vanished was both legally simple and socially accepted. No one in Giles County knew me well enough to observe that Eleanor had been without a child 1 month, and with one the next. In my own community in Maury County, people were told only that I was assisting my cousin through a severe winter, and nothing more. The child was born on the 16th of January 1865. Before we go further, a brief note. I have released 14 complete recordings that will never appear on YouTube. These are voices too private, too unguarded to share publicly, entirely unedited, with nothing removed. If you wish to hear them, the link is in the description. It is called The Lost Recordings, and obtaining it helps us continue making these videos. Now, back to the account. She was a girl, healthy and strong, and she possessed, as I noticed with a desperate tenderness I could not restrain, blue eyes of the same distinct shade as her father's, observant and thoughtful, as if already trying to understand the world she had entered. I had 7 days with her. Eleanor had consented to this 7 days before the story of her wardship needed to begin fully, before neighbors who had been informed that Eleanor had taken in an orphaned infant might come to visit and find me in circumstances that would demand explanation. 7 days, in which I fed that child from my own body and held her in the cold winter darkness and whispered to her things I had no power to guarantee, that she would be safe, that she would be loved, that Eleanor was a good woman who would care for her faithfully. Eleanor did care for her faithfully. I know this because I watched from a distance over the years and decades that followed. Eleanor named the child Clara. She raised her in Giles County with the steady competence and measured affection of a woman who had longed for children of her own and received one through indirect means. Clara grew up knowing herself as Eleanor's ward, an orphan of unnamed parents, a situation calm on enough after a war that had left so many children throughout the South without fathers and mothers. I returned to my parents' home in Maury County in March of 1865. The war ended in April. My brothers came home, William and June, thin and quiet, carrying wounds that could not be seen. John did not return until September, for reasons he never fully explained. My mother welcomed them with such powerful relief that every other concern in the household faded for those months. which suited me well enough. The matter was not discussed. The agreement within my family was complete and silent. It had not happened, or if it had, it was finished, and the future lay somewhere else. I accepted this understanding because I had no strength to do otherwise. I was 20 years old, living under my parents' roof in a defeated Confederate state under federal occupation, without independent means and without a future that did not pass through the expectations of the society in which I lived. In 1867, I married James Whitfield. James was 25 years old. James was 25 years old, a veteran of the Confederate Army who had served with honor in Cleburne's division during the Atlanta campaign and had returned home in the autumn of 1865 with one lung working and the other badly damaged by a fragment of Federal shell at Jonesboro. He was a quiet man, thoughtful and dependable, not inclined to excitement, but not inclined to harshness either. He had survived events that permanently changed his nature, as the war had changed most men who lived through it. Yet the changes were not ruinous. Over time, he became a man I sincerely respected and eventually truly loved, which I had not expected when I agreed to marry him. James knew nothing of what had taken place in the winter of 1864. My mother had made it plain to me in the months after I returned from Giles County that James Whitfield was a suitor of significant value, and that the discussions between our families depended entirely on his learning nothing that might cause him to withdraw. I accepted this condition without protest, which was perhaps the second greatest failure of my life, the first being the original act that required concealment. James was not the man I might have chosen if circumstances had been different. He was not inclined to speak about ideas, or to examine the workings of the world in the way I had once found compelling in Thomas Reeves. He was a practical man, concerned with crops and livestock and the care of property. His inner life, if it held any deep complexity, remained mostly closed to me throughout our 39 years together. Yet he was honest. He was loyal. He labored without complaint through the severe hardships of Reconstruction-era Tennessee, and he treated me with steady respect, which I valued more as I grew older and understood what the lack of such respect in a marriage would have meant. The Reconstruction years were difficult in ways that accounts from the North have not always fully described. The defeat of the Confederacy ended the fighting, but it did not answer how a ruined economy would be rebuilt, or how a society organized for generations around institutions that had now been abolished would reshape itself. Maury County had been among the more prosperous farming counties of Tennessee before the war. By 1867, when James and I married, it was poor in ways that reached beyond money. The men who had gone to war and returned were changed by experiences that could not be spoken of in polite company. The men who did not return had left behind families struggling as best they could with too little. James and I created our life together with what we had, which was not much. He farmed the land inherited from his father, who had died while James was serving with Cleburne in Georgia, managed the household, and contributed in every way possible, which was considerable since I had been raised to domestic efficiency by a mother who did not permit carelessness. By the early 1870s, we were secure enough that I no longer feared each approaching winter, which had not been true in the early years of our marriage. Our children were born with the regular pattern expected in that time. I bore James 7 children in the 17 years between 1868 and 1882, meaning I was almost constantly engaged in bearing and raising children throughout my 20s and 30s. 2 of the 7 were taken from us before they could grow into life. William at 2 years of age, Henry at 3. I grieved for them as a mother does, completely and without end, though the grief grows more familiar with passing years. The 5 who lived are and remain the greatest work of my life, and the clearest proof of whatever value I have had as a human being. James Jr. has his father's steadiness, and I am told, something of my father's sharpness in managing property. Sarah carries her father's quiet nature and a careful mind which she has applied to managing a physician's household in Nashville with visible skill. Martha is the warmest of the 5, the one who naturally draws others close and gathers them into her circle and her home in Memphis has long been the place where the family meets. Robert operates a hardware business in Colombia, with the same practical sense his father used in farming. Anne has shown in her widowhood a strength I should not have found surprising, given her origins, yet it still surprises me when I see it. None of them know about Clara. It is a strange thing to sit in a room with one's own children, as I have done countless times at dinner tables, in parlors, and on the porches of their different homes, and to hold within oneself a basic truth they do not possess. I have listened as they discuss their ancestry, their likenesses to grandparents, the traits inherited from the Crawford and Whitfield families. I have heard them rebuild their history through stories and memory, and I have remained among them, carrying the knowledge that their story is incomplete, that there is a sister they have never known, that their mother is not entirely the person they believe her to be. The burden of this knowledge has not been what I expected when I was young. When I returned from Giles County in the spring of 1865 and accepted my mother's command that the matter was ended, I believed the burden would lessen with time, that each passing year would add distance between me and what had happened, until it became only a distant event of youth, rather than a living and present weight. That did not happen. The burden did not grow lighter. It became familiar, which is something different. I learned to carry it, to spread it within myself in ways that made it manageable, but it never truly left me less noticeable from the outside. I learned to speak and behave in the normal flow of daily life, without letting the weight show. Yet the weight itself never lessened, and there were certain times when it pressed harder. The birth of each child who lived, the deaths of William and Henry, the passing of my mother and father, the death of James, all brought sharp reminders of what I had kept hidden. In those moments, the knowledge became painfully clear in ways that were not easy to control. Eleanor's death in 1921 was one of the hardest of all. She had been the only other living soul who knew the whole truth, though our letters could only touch on it in indirect ways. We had agreed from the start that nothing should be written that could not pass as ordinary letters between cousins. Simply knowing that she existed gave me comfort I did not fully value until it was gone. Someone else knew. Someone else carried the same awareness. She bore part of what I bore. When Eleanor died, I became the only keeper of a truth that would pass away with me if I allowed it. I allowed that silence to continue for 7 more years. Whether that waiting was wisdom or fear, I still cannot fully decide. I told myself I was waiting for the right time, the right method, the right setting that would let me reveal the truth with the least possible harm. I am not sure I was mistaken, though I am not certain I was correct either. What I do know is that the waiting is over, and that this account brings to an end 63 years of hiding a fact that deserved to be told. During the 17 years after my marriage, I gave birth to 7 children. The first, James Jr., was born in 1868. William followed in 1870, and we lost him to fever at 2 years old in the dreadful summer of 1872. Sarah came later in 1872, Martha in 1874, Robert in 1877, Anne 1879, and Henry in 1882. Henry followed his brother William into the grave at 3 years old, from the croup in the winter of 1885. Of the 7, 5 have lived to see me in old age. James Jr., Sarah, Martha, Robert, and Anne. They are decent people, able, respected, and settled in ways that bring me deep satisfaction. James Jr. farms land not far from here. Sarah married a doctor in Nashville and has 3 children. Martha lives in Memphis with her husband and their 4 children. Robert runs a hardware business in Colombia. My youngest surviving child was widowed in 1918 when her husband died, not in battle, but from the influenza that moved through the military camps that autumn. Since then, she has raised her 2 children alone with a strength I cannot help but admire. None of the 5 knows anything of Clara. Clara, who is 63 years old this winter. Clara, who was brought up as Eleanor. put its ward in Giles County and later married a man named Dawson and moved to Arkansas, where she still lives as far as I know, surrounded by her own children and grandchildren. Clara, who met me twice as a child when I visited Eleanor, and who called me Cousin Dorothy as she had been told to do. She had her father's blue eyes and a face that in nearly every other way was my own. I could not look at her long without fearing that my calm would fail me. The first meeting was in the autumn of 1868, when Clara was 3. Eleanor brought her to Maury County for a visit. I sat across from my daughter in my parents' parlor and carried myself through that afternoon with a steadiness that cost me dearly. Clara was a thoughtful child, already composed in the way of children raised without brothers or sisters, and mostly among adults. She watched everything with those blue eyes and spoke very little. The second meeting was in 1876, when Clara was 11. Eleanor brought her again to Columbia, and my parents welcomed them into the same parlor. By then I was married and had 3 children in the house. Clara looked at my children with an expression I could not fully understand. Perhaps curiosity, perhaps something deeper. She spoke more at that age, and was clearly intelligent, educated as well as Eleanor could manage with limited means. Attentive in the same way her father had been. I have not seen her since. Eleanor died in 1921, and with her passing went the last person who shared my knowledge. The letters we exchanged over the years, careful letters that never directly named what we both knew, I burned in the year she died. I could not keep them, and I could not ask anyone else to carry what I would not. They are ashes now. The only proof that remains is this testimony, and the living fact of Clara Dawson in Arkansas, who at 63 likely suspects know more about her true origins than she did at 3. In these last months, as I have prepared to speak, I have wondered whether this truth is a gift or another cruelty. Clara has built her sense of self across 6 decades without this knowledge. Whether learning it would bring her comfort or only confusion and pain, I cannot judge from where I sit. I have considered whether silence kept for 63 years might still be the kind of path. Clara has had a life. She had a husband, though I do not know if he still lives. Since Eleanor's death, I have had no letters from Arkansas and cannot be certain of her present situation. She has children and likely grandchildren. She built her identity on the history she was given, a history incomplete, but not entirely false. Eleanor was a good woman who cared for her faithfully. Clara did not lack for material support or for devoted care. Yet I return again and again to the belief that an incomplete story of one's own beginnings is a kind of loss, whether one feels it or not. Clara does not know that she was born of people capable of love, however imperfectly that love was shown. She does not know that her father was thoughtful and genuinely attentive. She does not know that her mother remembered her steadily for 63 years and did not forget, even when forgetting might have been easier. These truths belong to her. Whatever she chooses to do with them, or even if she chooses nothing at all, they are hers by right of birth. I have kept them long enough. My 5 lawful children also deserve this knowledge. They have a right to know they had a half-sister. They have a right to understand that their mother carried a significant truth throughout their lives without revealing it. They will not welcome it. James Jr., especially, whose nature values proper conduct above nearly all else, will find this deeply troubling. But discomfort is not destruction. They are grown and strong enough now to bear an unwelcome truth without being undone by it. What I most wish to make clear, the part I have repeated to myself in the cold early hours when sleep will not come, is the piece that cannot be explained away by circumstance. It cannot be softened by talk of what the war created, or what the times demanded, or what choices were open to a 19-year-old girl in occupied Tennessee in the winter of 1864. I have thought of Thomas Reeves across these 63 years, not with romantic longing. When I married James, I set such feelings aside. It would have served no one to hold affection for a man I would never see again, but I have remembered him as the other half of a fact, the absent partner in an event whose consequences I alone carried. for 6 decades. He left in October of 1864 with his regiment. I received one letter from him in December, written in careful and restrained language, as from a man unsure of what he might safely say. I did not answer. By the time his letter arrived, my condition had been known within my family for a month, and plans were already underway. Whether Thomas Reeves survived the final months of the war, I do not know. General Sherman's campaign through Georgia and the Carolinas in the winter of 1864 and spring of 1865 brought many deaths, and Ohio regiments were there. He may have returned to his father's farm near Dayton. He may have married and had children who carry something of that same attentive look I saw in Clara. Or he may have fallen at a creek in Georgia or in a hospital tent in the spring of 1865. One of the many who never came home. I do not feel toward him the resentment some might expect. The decisions made after he left were not his and were never shared with him. Whether he would have acted differently had he known, whether he would have tried to claim the child, to offer marriage, despite the difficulty, or simply to acknowledge what had happened, I cannot say. He was 22 years old in a war not yet finished, and what a young man of 22 might have chosen in such circumstances is something I have never been able to decide. The question of circumstances allows no clear or confident answer. I gave him no real chance to make any decision at all, and I am not fully certain that this was the right judgment, even though I made it with the best understanding I had at that time. I gave Clara away because I had no practical option that could fit any livable future for either of us. That much is plainly true, and I do not deny it. An unmarried girl of 19 in Tennessee in 1864, Karen, the daughter of a Federal soldier in a family that sympathized with the Confederacy, had no open road before her that would have allowed her to keep that child openly without ruining herself and harming her family, and giving the child a beginning so heavy with shame and poverty that it would have been its own kind of injury. The decision I made, if it can truly be called a decision, was the one that protected the greatest number of possible futures for everyone concerned. This is what I have told myself for many years, and it is not exactly false, but it is not the whole truth either. The full truth is that I was afraid, not only of the practical results, though those were real and serious, but also of the bravery it would have taken to stand against the expectations and judgments of the society in which I lived. I did not have enough courage at 19. Whether I might have had it at 25 or 30, I cannot know. The moment arrived when I was 19, and I faced it with the limited strength and wisdom I had at that age, which were not equal to what was required. I have spent 63 years telling myself that I acted as the situation demanded, and that is true. I have also spent 63 years aware, in some quiet part of my mind that refuses easy comfort, that I chose the simpler road and paid for it, with a sorrow that never fully faded. With a sorrow that never fully faded, and that Clara paid for it in ways I cannot measure, because I was not there to witness them. The war made many things possible that otherwise would not have happened, and it made other things necessary that would never have been required. I do not blame the war for my own failures. Thomas Reeves and I made our choices without anyone directing us, and the responsibility for what followed belongs to us, not to the historical events that created the setting. James, my husband, died in 196, having reached his 64th year with the one working lung that the explosion at Jonesboro had left him. In his final years he was a man at peace. He had built something steady from the broken pieces the war had made of his youth, and he knew it and took quiet pride in it. I was beside him when he died, as I had been present for most of the important moments of our 39 years of marriage, and I did not tell him then what I am telling now. I considered it during those last days. By then he could not have been greatly troubled by anything. Yet I allowed myself to stay silent, whether out of care for his calm or protection of my own. I cannot say with complete honesty. I am speaking now because there are no other choices left. I am 83 years old, and my doctor has said that I may not live through the winter. My mother's command to keep silent has been respected far beyond what any reasonable idea of duty to a parent would require. Clara is 63 years old, and if she is to discover who she truly is, while there is still time for that knowledge to matter, it must happen now. My 5 children deserve to know the whole truth about their mother before they stand at her grave and realize they have only part of the story. I do not expect any of them to accept this easily. I do not strongly hope that Clara, if this account reaches her, will feel anything other than the mix of feelings such news would bring to most people: surprise, perhaps sorrow, perhaps anger, perhaps a confusion that has no clear name. I am not sharing this because I believe it will lead to happy results. I am sharing it because it is true, because Clara is real, because she has always been real, and because pretending she did not exist has been a long act of erasing that I am no longer willing to continue. She had Thomas Reeves's eyes, blue and alert and thoughtful, as if the person behind them was truly engaged with the world, instead of only passing through it. I have remembered those eyes regularly across 63 years. I have remembered those eyes regularly across 63 years, through the births of 5 other children, through the deaths of a husband and 2 sons, through all the ordinary and unusual events of a long life, lived in careful concealment of its most important fact. I do not know whether Thomas Reeves is still alive. He would be 86 years old now if he survived, which seems unlikely. He left my life in October of 1864. I received 1 letter from him in December of that year, and nothing more. Whether he ever knew that Clara was born, I cannot say. He may have died in the final months of the war, during Sherman's march through East Georgia, or in the Carolina campaign that ended in the spring of 1865. I did not try to find out at the time, and I have not tried since. Whatever happened to him, he enters this account only as the fact that made it possible. I have asked my granddaughter, who has helped me put this record together, to see that it is delivered to each of my 5 children, and that if there is any way to pass its contents to Clara Dawson in Arkansas, that way should be taken. I do not know her exact address. Eleanor's estate papers, such as they exist, may offer a beginning. I can do no more than point in a direction. Others must decide whether the path is worth following. This is what I wish to say before I die. This is the truth I have carried for 63 years. In every house I entered, in every church service I attended, in every Sunday meal I shared with children who did not know they had a sister growing up 20 miles away. The burden of it has been heavy. I advise against such long-kept silences to anyone who might ask my opinion, though no one ever has, but I give it freely now that I have so little time left and so little reputation left to guard. I have been in most respects a respectable woman. I believe this to be true, despite what I have just confessed. People are not simple creatures, and even the decent among us can fail greatly when the pressure is strong and the courage is weak. I was not equal to the moment 63 years ago, and I have carried that failure through the rest of my life. I do not ask for forgiveness. I am not sure I deserve it, and in any case, the ones who have the right to grant or refuse it are Clara and Thomas Reeves, neither of whom I expect to meet again in this world. I ask only that the truth be acknowledged. Clara was real. She is real still, or I believe she is. She came from Thomas Reeves and from me in that strange, painful, and not entirely without you to love, summer of 1864, when the war was nearly over and the world that raised us was falling apart, and we were young and did not understand, as one rarely does at 19, the full weight of the choices we were making. I have said what I needed to say. I am very tired now. I would like to rest.